He sewed a white dress for a ragged giant girl. All of warriors came to the wedding. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a quiet afternoon in the western frontier, the sun beating down mercilessly over the dry, dusty land. Luke, a solitary rancher with a weathered face and worn hands, was hunched over, carefully repairing a fence on his secluded property. His land stretched for miles, but the isolation never bothered him. He preferred the company of his animals to the people he left behind in the bustling towns. It was a life of hard work and solitude, and he had come to accept it. But today, something was different. As he worked, a figure appeared on the horizon, slowly drawing closer. At first, it looked like a mirage, just a blur against the flat landscape. But as it neared, Luke squinted against the glare and saw her, a giant woman, her size so imposing that it seemed unnatural. She was ragged, her clothes torn and patched up with scraps of fabric, her long hair tangled and wild. Despite her size, she moved with a quiet grace, almost as if the land itself parted for her to walk. Luke had heard the stories, of course, stories of native tribes, their warriors, and the women who were as fierce as any man. But this woman was different. Her presence felt like an echo of something ancient, something powerful. She stopped a few yards away, looking at him with an unreadable expression. "I need help," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. Luke was taken aback. He wasn't accustomed to visitors, especially not ones that looked like her. "What do you need?" he asked cautiously, trying to hide his surprise. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her hands trembling slightly, as if she were struggling with something internal. Finally, she spoke again. "I need a new dress. One that will help me be seen as I am, not as they say I am." The words confused Luke at first, but something in the way she said them struck a chord deep inside him. She wasn't asking for food or shelter. She was asking for dignity, for something that could transform her from the object of fear and misunderstanding into something else entirely. Without thinking, Luke nodded. "I can help with that," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Over the next few days, Luke worked tirelessly, cutting and stitching together the finest white fabric he had. His hands moved quickly, driven by something he couldn't quite explain. He had never made a dress before, but this time, it felt like he was creating something sacred, something that would change everything. When he was finished, the dress was simple but beautiful, the kind of garment that could transform anyone who wore it. The woman returned, and when she saw the dress, her face softened. She didn't smile, but there was a look of gratitude in her eyes. "This is more than I expected," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Luke watched as she slipped into the dress, its fabric flowing around her like a river of light. The transformation was astounding. The woman who had once looked so ragged and worn now stood tall and regal, as if she had shed the burdens of her past. She turned to him, her eyes now full of determination. "I will return to my people," she said, "and they will see me as I truly am." Luke watched her walk away, her figure becoming a silhouette against the horizon. He had no idea what the future held for her or for him, but he knew that this small act of kindness had set something in motion that could not be undone. Little did he know, the next day, an army of warriors would arrive at his door, not to destroy him, but to honor him, and the wedding would be the beginning of something much larger than either of them could have imagined. The days following her departure were quiet, almost too quiet. Luke returned to his daily routine, the solitude of the ranch wrapping itself around him like a familiar, comforting blanket. But deep down, something had shifted. He found himself glancing at the horizon more often, expecting to see her return. It was impossible to shake the feeling that her presence had marked a turning point in his life, one he could neither predict nor fully understand. Then, the morning arrived when everything changed. He was working on the barn when he heard the distant sound of hooves. At first, it seemed like the usual occasional rider passing by, but the rhythm of the galloping was different. The sound grew louder, more urgent, and soon, The earth beneath Luke's boots seemed to tremble with the weight of what was coming. He stepped out into the open, squinting against the bright morning sun, and saw them. They came in a perfect formation, more than 100 riders, each one clad in leather armor and adorned with war paint. Their horses moved as one, a wave of power and precision rolling toward his land. Luke's heart raced as they approached, the sight so overwhelming that he almost couldn't breathe. The warriors, all Apache, rode with a quiet confidence that demanded respect, their presence alone sending a message of authority. As they reached his ranch, they stopped. The air was thick with tension, the silence louder than any words could be. The leader, a tall man with scars on his face and a headdress of feathers that seemed to catch the light, dismounted and approached Luke slowly. The others followed, forming a circle around him. Luke stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. He thought he might be in danger, but there was no hostility in their eyes, only something far more intense. The leader stopped a few feet away, his piercing gaze never leaving Luke. "You helped her," he said, his voice deep and steady. "And now, we come to honor you." Luke blinked, confused. He opened his mouth to speak, but found no words. Honor him. He had only sewn a dress for a woman he didn't fully understand. "I don't want trouble," Luke finally managed to say, his voice rough from the dust and the weight of the situation. The leader smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "There will be no trouble. You have done something that no one else in our tribe would dare to do. You gave her dignity when she had none. You helped her when the world turned its back on her. That is something we do not forget." With a signal, the warriors behind him stepped forward, each of them carrying a gift, a leather pouch, a necklace of carved bone, and a bundle wrapped in furs. They placed the gifts at Luke's feet, their movements precise and respectful. "These are our thanks," the leader continued. "And this is just the beginning. You will come with us." Luke was still reeling, his mind spinning with disbelief. The woman he had helped had returned, but she was not alone. She was now a symbol of something far greater than he could have imagined. The leader reached out and placed a hand on Luke's shoulder, his touch firm but not aggressive. "We have need of you," he said. "You may have thought you were alone in this world, but you are not. You are now part of something much larger." Before Luke could respond, the leader turned to his warriors. "Prepare the horses. We leave at once." Luke looked at the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. The warrior's words were both an invitation and a command. His world, the one he had worked so hard to keep small and manageable, was about to expand in ways he couldn't fathom. He had no choice but to follow. With one last look at his ranch, his home, Luke mounted his horse and followed the warriors. As they rode together toward the horizon, he couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something new. A journey that would change everything, not just for him, but for the woman who had changed his life with nothing more than a simple request for help. As the sun began to set, Luke rode alongside the Apache warriors, the rhythmic sound of hooves marking the passage of time. The land stretched before them, vast and empty, but filled with an energy Luke couldn't quite place. He had never been this far from his ranch, and the sight of the open plains, with their rugged beauty, made him feel both awestruck and uneasy. The warriors rode in perfect formation, their faces calm, their bodies strong. He couldn't help but wonder what they were all thinking, what drove them to this point. As they journeyed, Luke's thoughts turned to the woman he had helped, the giant girl who had come to his door. Her name, he had learned, was Ayana. She had explained little of herself, but in the few words she had spoken, Luke had sensed a deep well of sadness, a quiet strength that came from having lived through hardships most people could never imagine. They arrived at a large encampment just as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. The firelight flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the tents and structures that made up the Apache camp. As they entered the camp, the warriors dismounted, and Luke followed their lead, unsure of what was expected of him. Ayana was waiting for him by a large fire, her silhouette framed by the flames. When she saw him, she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made his heart skip a beat. "You've made it," she said, her voice low and steady. Luke nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't have much choice," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "Where are we going from here?" Ayana motioned for him to sit beside her. "You are part of this now," she said simply. You have helped me in a way that no one else has. My people owe you a debt, and we repay our debts, no matter the cost. Luke felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had only sewn a dress for her. How could that be enough to owe him a debt this large? Before he could say anything, a group of warriors approached, their faces unreadable. They were led by the same man who had spoken to Luke earlier, the leader of the group. He walked over to Luke, his gaze piercing. You are not just a rancher, he said, his voice firm. You have earned our respect. You have done what few would ever dare. But now, you must understand the weight of your actions. Luke looked up at the leader, his heart pounding. What do you mean? The leader motioned to the camp, to the people gathered around the fire, the children playing in the distance. You are now part of the Apache tribe, he said. You will fight for us, stand with us, and defend what is ours. Luke's eyes widened. This was more than he had ever imagined. He had only helped a woman in need, but now it seemed like he was being pulled into something much larger, something that would change the course of his life forever. Ayana spoke again, her voice gentle but resolute. This is your choice now, Luke. You can leave, return to your ranch and your life. Or you can stay and help us fight for what is ours. The choice is yours, but know this. Once you make it, there is no turning back. Luke stood there, staring at Ayana, her face glowing in the firelight. He thought about his lonely ranch, about the life he had built in solitude. But that life felt distant now, as if it no longer belonged to him. His heart raced as he looked around at the warriors, the people who had welcomed him into their fold without hesitation. He knew, in that moment, that his decision would define the rest of his life. Without speaking a word, Luke made his choice. He turned to the leader and nodded. I'll stay, he said, his voice steady. I'll fight with you. A sense of relief washed over him, followed by a rush of adrenaline. This was the beginning of something new, something bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something much greater, and the path ahead of him was uncertain, but full of promise. As the fire crackled and the warriors began to prepare for the days ahead, Luke knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. He had stepped into a new world, and there was no going back. The days that followed were filled with a sense of purpose Luke had never known before. As he trained alongside the Apache warriors, learning their ways and understanding their culture, he found himself changing. The long hours spent riding, practicing combat skills, and preparing for what lay ahead felt different than the lonely days spent mending fences or tending cattle on his ranch. His life had a new rhythm now, one that pulsed with the energy of the tribe around him. Ayana, too, had changed. The woman who had once been a ragged outsider, lost in the shadows of her people, was now a leader in her own right. The tribe had embraced her, and with their acceptance, she had grown in strength. Luke had watched this transformation, and in many ways, he had been part of it. As the days turned to weeks, the bond between Luke and Ayana deepened. There was something unspoken between them, a connection that neither of them fully understood but both felt. They had shared moments in the quiet of the night, talking about their pasts, their regrets, their hopes. But it was not just words that bound them. It was the shared experiences of the days they spent fighting side by side, of facing danger together and learning to trust one another in ways that few could. One night, as the campfire flickered in the distance, Luke sat beside Ayana near the edge of the camp. They had been practicing hand-to-hand combat earlier in the day, and now they were both catching their breath. The warriors had gathered for their evening meal, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, alone in the quiet. Ayana broke the silence first. You have learned much in such a short time, she said, her voice low and thoughtful. I have to, Luke replied, looking out at the horizon. I made a choice when I decided to stay. I can't just be here and do nothing. I want to help. Ayana nodded, her gaze distant. And you are helping, she said quietly. But it is not just the warriors who need help. It is the people, the ones who have suffered for too long. Luke turned to look at her, seeing the weight of her words. What do you mean? He asked. Ayana's eyes met his, her expression serious. The world beyond this camp, beyond our tribe, does not see us as people. They see us as obstacles, as threats. They do not understand our way of life, our traditions, our honor. They only see what they fear. Luke could feel the fire in her words, the passion that drove her. He had seen it in her eyes during the long nights of training, during the fierce battles they fought together. But now, in this moment, he saw something more. He saw the burden she carried, the weight of leadership, the responsibility to protect her people. "What do we do?" Luke asked, his voice steady. "We fight," Ayana replied without hesitation. "We fight for our land, for our way of life. But it will not be easy. There will be sacrifices. There will be blood." Luke nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had seen enough of the Apache warriors to know that they were not afraid of battle. But he had also seen enough to know that it would take more than strength to win this war. It would take heart, and it would take trust. "Then let's fight," Luke said, his voice filled with determination. Together, as the days passed, the tribe prepared for the inevitable conflict. Luke found himself drawn deeper into their world, becoming more than just a helper. He became a warrior in his own right, standing alongside Ayana and the other Apache fighters as they made their plans. He learned their strategies, their ways of fighting, and their unshakable bond with the land. And with each passing day, the bond between him and Ayana grew stronger. But as much as they fought side by side, Luke knew that this battle was bigger than either of them. It was a battle for the soul of the land, for the future of the Apache people. And Luke knew that, no matter what happened, he would stand by Ayana until the end. It was a choice he had made long ago, and one that he would never regret. The night before the battle, as the tribe gathered around the fire, Luke and Ayana stood at the edge of the camp once more. The stars above seemed endless, the air crisp and cool against their skin. Ayana turned to Luke, her expression soft. "You are ready," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Luke met her gaze, his heart racing. "I'm ready," he replied. The battle was coming, and no matter what happened, they would face it together. The morning of the battle arrived faster than Luke had anticipated. The air was thick with tension, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on the entire camp. Warriors moved silently, preparing their weapons and checking their gear. The smell of leather and smoke lingered in the air, the low murmur of the tribe's elders giving way to the steady rhythm of the warriors' preparation. Luke stood at the edge of the camp, his hand resting on the hilt of his rifle. He had become part of this tribe, not just through his actions, but through the bond he shared with Ayana and the others. He had trained alongside them, fought with them, and now he would stand with them in battle. Ayana approached him, her figure tall and commanding. The firelight from the camp cast a glow over her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. She was no longer the ragged girl who had walked into his life, but a leader, strong and resolute. She looked at Luke, her voice low but steady. "Are you ready?" she asked. Luke met her gaze, the weight of her question settling in his chest. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. "We fight for what's right." Ayana nodded, her face softening for a moment. "You've proven yourself to be more than just a rancher. You've proven yourself to be one of us." Luke's heart swelled with pride, but he knew that pride could not cloud his focus. This was no ordinary fight. The forces they faced were large and powerful, and it would take every ounce of strength and strategy they had to stand a chance. "Let's finish this," Luke said, his voice thick with determination. The tribe gathered around the central fire one last time, the warriors forming a circle around their leaders. Ayana stepped forward, her voice carrying across the camp. "Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for our future, for the land that belongs to us. We fight for our ancestors and for those who will come after us. We will not back down." The warriors raised their weapons in unison, the sound of their battle cry echoing across the land. Luke stood tall beside Ayana, feeling the strength of the tribe surge through him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a cause he believed in, for a people who had shown him more honor than he ever thought possible. As the warriors mounted their horses and prepared to ride out, Luke's thoughts flashed back to the moment he first helped Ayana. It seemed like a lifetime ago when she had asked for his help, when he had sewn the white dress that had changed everything. He had never expected it to lead to this, to a battle that would define the future of the Apache people. But now, as he rode alongside Ayana, the weight of his decision settled in. This was where he was meant to be. They rode for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky as they approached the enemy camp. Luke's heart pounded in his chest, his grip tightening on his weapon. He could see the smoke rising from the enemy camp. In the distance, the figures of their enemies preparing for battle. The moment had arrived. Ayana gave a sharp signal, and the warriors began to spread out, positioning themselves for the attack. Luke followed Ayana's lead, his mind clear and focused. This was not just a fight for land. It was a fight for the survival of a culture, for the preservation of everything they held dear. As they closed in on the enemy, Luke's adrenaline surged. He had fought in smaller skirmishes before, but this was different. This was war. He could hear the war cries of the enemy, but they didn't faze him. The Apache warriors were fierce, and they would not be intimidated. They would fight until the very end. The first wave of combat was swift. Luke's rifle cracked in the air as he took down his first opponent, the sound of the shot lost in the chaos of the battle. He moved with the warriors, his training kicking in as he fought alongside them. The enemy was strong, but they were disorganized, and the Apache warriors were swift and precise. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each strike calculated and purposeful. Luke fought with everything he had, his mind focused on the mission, on the people he had come to love and protect. As the battle raged on, Luke found himself side by side with Ayana, their movements synchronized as they took down enemy after enemy. She was a force to be reckoned with, her strength and skill unmatched. Together, they fought with the fury of a people who had been wronged for far too long. Hours passed, the battle showing no signs of slowing down. But Luke felt the tide turning. The enemy was beginning to falter, their lines breaking under the relentless assault of the Apache warriors. He knew that victory was within reach. The moment of triumph came when Ayana, with a final rallying cry, led the charge to the enemy's command center. With one swift strike, the battle was won. The enemy had been defeated, and the Apache people had secured their land. Luke stood in the aftermath, his body bruised and battered, but his spirit stronger than ever. He had fought for a cause, and together with Ayana and the warriors, they had won. The future of the Apache people was secure, and Luke knew that his place was here, among them. The journey had been long, but it had been worth it. The bond between Luke and Ayana had only grown stronger through the battle, and as the sun set over the camp, Luke knew that they had won not just a battle, but a future together. The days after the battle were filled with a strange sense of peace. The Apache warriors celebrated their victory, but there was no sense of triumph, only relief. The war was over, but it had come at a cost. Luke, though exhausted and bloodied, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had been part of something that would change the course of history for the Apache people, and in that moment, he knew he had found his true purpose. The camp was quieter now, the fires burning low, and the warriors had started to return to their villages. Luke and Ayana stood together by the edge of the camp, looking out over the land they had fought so hard to protect. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the plains, and for the first time in a long while, Luke felt a sense of belonging. Ayana turned to him, her expression serious. "You've proven yourself," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But there's still much to be done." Luke nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The battle had been won, but the work of rebuilding, of ensuring the future of the Apache people, was just beginning. "I know," he replied, "but I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes." Ayana smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I knew you would." Over the next few weeks, the camp began to transform. The warriors worked together to rebuild their homes and gather resources for the coming winter. Luke joined them, his hands now familiar with the tasks at hand. But as he worked, his thoughts often drifted back to the night of the battle, to the moment when Ayana had led the charge and brought victory to the tribe. He admired her strength and determination, but he also saw the weight of leadership in her eyes. She was not just a warrior. She was a leader, and it was clear that the responsibility of that role weighed heavily on her. One evening, as the tribe gathered around the fire, Luke sat next to Ayana, watching the flames dance in the night. The sounds of the tribe's voices filled the air, but the two of them sat in silence. After a while, Ayana spoke. "You know, it's not just the battle we fought. It's the future we build." Luke looked at her, seeing the burden she carried. "I understand," he said. "I've seen what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. But it's more than just fighting. It's about making sure that what we fight for lasts." Ayana nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "We've fought for our land, our people, and our way of life. But the world is changing. We can't afford to be left behind." Luke's heart swelled with pride for the tribe, for Ayana. He knew she was right. The battle had been won, but the future would require more than just strength. It would require unity, wisdom, and the willingness to adapt. What do we do now? Luke asked, his voice filled with determination. Ayana turned to him, her eyes steady. We build. We make sure that the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles we fought. We teach them our ways, and we protect them from the dangers that still lurk in the world. Luke felt a sense of clarity wash over him. This was the path he had chosen, the one that would shape the rest of his life. He had found his place among the Apache people, not just as a warrior, but as a protector, a builder of the future. I'm with you, he said, his voice firm. We'll build it together. As the days passed, the camp slowly took shape. The warriors and their families worked side by side. Their efforts focused on creating a community that could thrive for generations to come. Luke and Ayana became more than just allies. They became partners in the truest sense of the word. They shared their dreams for the future, their hopes for the children who would one day inherit the land they had fought so hard to protect. And as the sun rose each morning, casting its golden light over the camp, Luke knew that this was where he was meant to be. His journey had led him here, to a place of purpose, to a future he had never imagined. But now, with Ayana by his side and the Apache people behind him, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would build a legacy that would endure long after their time. The battle was over, but the real work had just begun. The months following the battle were a time of rebuilding. Luke had never imagined that his life would change so drastically. The land, once barren and empty, now thrummed with the energy of the Apache people, and it was clear that his presence had made an impact. The tribe was thriving, their homes being rebuilt, their families growing stronger. Luke had taken on more responsibility than he had ever expected. He wasn't just a warrior anymore. He was part of the community, a man who had fought for something worth protecting. He worked alongside Ayana every day, learning from her, understanding the depth of her wisdom and leadership. Together, they helped the people prepare for the future. But even as life began to settle into a new rhythm, there was an underlying tension. The world outside their camp had not changed. The settlers, the governments, the men who wanted to take what didn't belong to them, those threats still lingered. Luke knew that the fight wasn't over. One evening, as the camp gathered around the fire, Ayana and Luke sat side by side, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They had just finished a long day of work, and the warriors were sharing stories and laughter, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Ayana noticed his silence and turned to him. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of understanding. Luke looked at her, his eyes tired but determined. "We've won the battle," he said slowly. "But there are still others out there who will try to take everything we've worked for." Ayana nodded, her gaze steady. "I know. The world is changing, but some things will never change. There will always be those who want to take what doesn't belong to them. But we fight to keep what's ours." Luke's heart swelled with pride at her words. She had become not just a leader, but the symbol of everything the Apache people stood for. "And we will fight," he said, his voice firm. Ayana smiled, a rare, soft smile. "Yes, we will. But we fight with wisdom now. We don't just take up arms. We fight for the future, for the generations that will come after us." The conversation lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of what they knew would come. The peace they had fought for was fragile, and it was clear that the path ahead would be filled with more challenges. But Luke was no longer afraid of the future. He knew that with Ayana by his side, they could face anything. The next few weeks brought a series of unexpected events. As the tribe worked to solidify their position, they received word that a large group of settlers had arrived at the edge of their land. Luke's heart sank. He had known this day would come, but the reality of it was different. The settlers were not just looking for land. They were looking to claim what they believed was theirs by right. Luke and Ayana gathered the warriors together, and after a tense discussion, they decided to confront the settlers before they could encroach further into their territory. It was not a decision Luke took lightly, but he understood the necessity of it. The following morning, as the sun rose over the land, Luke and Ayana led the warriors to the edge of their territory. The settlers were camped at the edge of the forest, their fires burning brightly in the early light. Luke could see the men standing in small groups, talking amongst themselves. unaware of the Apache warriors who were closing in. As they approached, Luke felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This was not a battle he had wanted, but it was one he would fight for the future of the Apache people. Ayana stood by his side, her eyes scanning the area with a calm determination. She had led her people through the worst of times, and now, she would lead them through this. Luke took a deep breath, his fingers brushing the handle of his rifle. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the right to live freely, for the right to protect everything they had built. When they reached the settlers' camp, Ayana called out, her voice carrying through the still morning air. The settlers turned, startled by the sudden appearance of the Apache warriors. There was a moment of silence before one of the settlers stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We come in peace," he said, his voice shaking. "We only want to settle this land." Luke's heart clenched. He had heard this story before, the same words spoken by every group of settlers who had ever come into their land. "This land does not belong to you," Ayana said, her voice firm. "It belongs to the Apache people, and we will not give it up." The settler's face hardened. "We have a right to this land," he said, his voice now filled with defiance. "You don't own it. We've come to claim it." Luke could see the tension in the air, the threat of violence hanging just beneath the surface. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "You will not take this land from us. We fought for it, and we will continue to fight for it." Ayana's warriors stood at the ready, their faces set with determination. The settlers were outnumbered, and they knew it. The standoff stretched on for what felt like an eternity, until finally, the settlers lowered their hands, retreating back into their camp. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As the settlers packed up and left, Luke turned to Ayana. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked. Ayana shook her head. "No, but it is a start, and we will keep fighting for as long as it takes." The days after the settlers left were filled with a quiet tension. The Apache people had won a small victory, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. Luke stood by the edge of the camp, watching the horizon as the sun dipped low in the sky. The air was thick with the weight of what lay ahead. The settlers had retreated, but Luke knew they would be back. They always came back. Ayana stood beside him, her gaze distant as she looked out over the land they had fought so hard to protect. "We've bought ourselves some time," she said, her voice steady but full of the knowledge that this peace was fragile. Luke nodded, his mind racing. He had seen the way the settlers looked at them, the way they believed the land was theirs for the taking, and he knew that they would not stop until they had it. "What do we do now?" Luke asked, his voice filled with determination. "We prepare," Ayana replied, turning to face him. "We strengthen our people, our defenses, and we make sure that we are ready when they come back. We will not let them take what is ours." Luke's heart swelled with pride at her words. She had become not just a leader, but a symbol of everything the Apache people stood for. She had shown him what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself, and he had learned to trust in her vision. Over the next few weeks, the tribe worked tirelessly to fortify their position. The warriors trained harder than ever, practicing their combat skills and refining their strategies. The women and children worked alongside them, gathering supplies and preparing for the possibility of a long and difficult fight. Luke found himself more involved than ever before. He had learned much about the ways of the Apache, and now, he was helping to teach the younger warriors, passing on the knowledge he had gained. He spent long hours with Ayana, discussing the future and the challenges they would face. She was always thinking ahead, always planning for what was to come. But even as the tribe prepared for the worst, there was still a sense of hope. They were united, stronger than they had ever been, and they knew that they had something worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Luke looked at Ayana, his mind filled with the weight of their situation. "Do you ever wonder if this will ever end?" he asked, his voice quiet. Ayana turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But what I do know is that we fight for what is right. We fight for our people, for our land, and for the future. And no matter how long it takes, we will keep fighting." Luke nodded, his heart filled with admiration for her strength and resolve. He had come a long way from the lonely rancher who had sewn a dress for a ragged girl. Now, he was part of something much bigger, and the future, though uncertain, seemed full of possibility. As the days passed, the tribe continued to prepare. They knew that the settlers would return, and they were ready. Luke stood at the edge of the camp one evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains. He had found his place here, among the Apache people, and he knew that no matter what came next, he would stand with them. The sound of hooves in the distance caught his attention. He turned to see a lone rider approaching, kicking up dust as they came closer. Luke's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the rider. It was a scout from the nearby settlement. The time had come. The rider reached the camp and dismounted, holding up a piece of parchment. "The settlers are gathering," the scout said. "They're preparing for another push. They will be here soon." Luke felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This was it. The settlers were coming, and they would not stop until they had what they wanted. He turned to Ayana, his eyes filled with determination. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady. Ayana nodded, her gaze hardening. "We are, and we will fight, no matter what." The battle was coming, and Luke knew that this time, they would not back down. They had already fought once, and they had won. But now, they would fight for the future, for everything they had worked for. They would fight for their land, for their people, and for their right to live as they always had. As the warriors gathered around the fire, preparing for the fight ahead, Luke stood tall, his heart filled with a sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. Together, with Ayana by his side and the Apache people at his back, Luke knew they could face whatever came next. The morning of the final battle arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The warriors of the Apache tribe had gathered, their faces grim, their weapons sharp. Luke stood among them, his heart steady but his mind racing. He had come a long way from the rancher who had sewn a white dress for a ragged girl. Now he was part of something much bigger. A leader in his own right, he had earned the trust and respect of the Apache people. Beside him stood Ayana, her presence as commanding as ever. Her eyes, always so calm and thoughtful, now burned with a fierce intensity. She had become a symbol of strength and determination, and Luke could feel the weight of the responsibility they both carried. The settlers were coming, and this time, they would not retreat. This was not just a battle for land. It was a battle for their way of life, for their right to exist as they always had. Luke could hear the distant sound of horses, the unmistakable rhythm of the enemy's approach. He could feel the tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. The warriors stood in perfect formation, waiting for the signal to advance. Ayana turned to Luke, her voice low but resolute. "Today, we fight for our future," she said. "For the people we love and the land we call home. We will not let them take it from us." Luke nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He had fought beside these warriors before, but today felt different. Today, they were not just defending their land. They were defending their legacy. As the sound of hooves grew louder, Luke's grip tightened around his rifle. He could see the enemy now, their figures emerging from the dust, the sun glinting off their weapons. They were more organized than before, but Luke had no doubt that the Apache warriors were ready. Ayana raised her hand, signaling the charge. The warriors rode forward, their war cries echoing across the land. Luke joined them, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle was fierce, the ground shaking beneath their feet as the two forces collided. The sound of rifle fire, the clash of swords, and the war cries filled the air. Luke fought with everything he had, his movements swift and decisive. He had become one with the Apache warriors, their training and strength now part of him. But even as the battle raged on, his thoughts kept returning to Ayana. She was at the front, leading the charge, her eyes focused, her movements fluid and precise. She was a warrior, a leader, and a force to be reckoned with. As the battle continued, Luke could see the tide turning. The settlers were beginning to retreat, their lines breaking under the relentless assault of the Apache warriors. Luke fought his way to the front, where Ayana was locked in combat with one of the settler leaders. She moved with the grace and power of a seasoned warrior, but Luke could see the strain in her eyes. He knew this battle had taken its toll on her, but he also knew that she would not stop until the fight was won. With one final push, the Apache warriors overwhelmed the settlers, forcing them to flee. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the fight, but the Apache people had emerged victorious. The settlers had been driven back, and the land was theirs once again. As the warriors gathered around the fire that night, the camp was filled with a sense of relief and triumph. The battle was over, But the real work had just begun. Luke stood beside Ayana, his heart swelling with pride. They had fought together, side by side, and together, they had won. Ayana turned to him, her eyes softening for the first time in days. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Luke nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Together," he said. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Luke felt a sense of peace. He had found his place among the Apache people, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew he would face them with Ayana by his side. The land they had fought for was theirs, and they would continue to protect it, for themselves and for future generations. The battle was over, but the legacy of the Apache people would endure, carried on by the warriors who had fought and won, and by the bond between Luke and Ayana, forged in the fires of battle and sealed in the quiet moments of shared strength. The world outside might change, but as long as they stood together, they would remain unbroken.